Dr. Marcia Chatelain is a Pulitzer Prize and James Beard Award-winning historian at Georgetown. She opened a recent Carnegie Hall program with these words. What reflecting on migration does, it requires us to sit in the fullness of the pain of that experience in order to really appreciate the beautiful things that emerge from it. That seemed like the right way to introduce today's program. Good afternoon. My name is Gary Stoppelman. I am the Executive Director at the Dubuque Museum of Art. Thank you for joining us today here and online. In a few moments, forensic genealogist Ricki King will talk about the Great Migration and Iowa's Black pioneers. The Great Migration is an epic movement of 6 million African Americans who left the South between World War I and the 1970s. It changed family histories, it changed art histories, it changed American culture, and it continues to affect the trajectory of every state in the Union. I'm excited to learn from Ricki because when I learned about the Great Migration in school, it was in the context of the biggest cities, Chicago, Detroit, New York. It was not in the context of the impact of the Great Migration on Iowa, and it certainly was not in the context of Iowa on the Great Migration. And I'm sure that we will sit with some of the pain of that experience, but we will also celebrate some beauty today, including some fascinatingly beautiful connections that Ricki and our artist Jill made in their work together. In December of 2021, Anderson Sansey introduced Margie and I to Des Moines-based artist and activist Jill Wells. Jill's work has broadened my perspective and changed how I think about what it means to make accessible art experiences. And I think you'll understand more about that after listening to Jill. It is her exhibition, Black Thread, that we celebrate this afternoon. I'm excited to learn more from her following Ricki's talk. I do want to shout out a few folks who made today possible. Thank you to the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque for hosting us in this beautiful space and online. A day like this requires an extraordinary team. Folks from around the community rolled up their sleeves and asked how they could help. And in record time. I want to thank John Deere Dubuque Works, who said, we want to support Black Thread and bring our staff to experience this. Special thanks to Iowa Radio Reading Information Services for the audio descriptions, and the Iowa Department of Blind for the Braille labels. Folks, come on in. There are seats down here in front. There's plenty of space, plenty of seats down here if you'd like to join us. Thank you to Anderson, Stacy, Emma, Keith, Amy, Miles, John, Hyler, Maddie, Eric, and Paul who put together what you will experience today, and to Margie who put together this program. So it is now my pleasure to welcome Robin McEnany of Green State Credit Union, whose support makes today possible.
Good afternoon. Today is a special moment for all of us as we gather on this beautiful Sunday in January. Friday, as the 3-day weekend was approaching, our CEO, Jeff Disserhoff, sent an email to the entire staff regarding the importance of our time off on Monday. He included in his email a letter from Martin Luther King in 1963, which was an open letter, and Jeff highlighted some passages. Jeff asked, as we honor Dr. King this weekend, to contemplate how we can take steps in our own circle of influence to help make his dream possible in 2023. Today is the beginning. It is an honor to be here to welcome all of you as we open up the exhibit of Jill Wells' art Black Thread. We are so excited to have you and to learn about your art and your exhibit. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Robin. The City of Dubuque is one of our deepest community partners. Assistant Planner Chris Happ Olson recently introduced us to Ricki King. So please welcome Chris to introduce Ricki once again.
Thank you. So excited to see a nice full room today. Come out and learn more. I'm Chris Happel, and I'm an assistant planner for the City of Dubuque, and I am privileged to be able to work on the Black Heritage Survey. I work in preservation of the city. And I first learned about Ricki King when she presented through the State Historical Society's Lunch and Learn 2 years ago. And so she talked about Black migration in Iowa, around Iowa, out of Iowa, and back again. And I realized that I really needed to reach out to her because it was going to be critical for us to be able to move forward if we were going to do a Black Heritage Survey, to understand that process and also the skills that she had as a genealogist. And Zooming with her, I realized she was just such a resource for what we wanted to do. The Dubuque's Black Heritage Survey researches Dubuque's Black history in order to give us an understanding of it. And with that, we can braid that history back into Dubuque's larger story. About a year later, we were up and running with the project, and I was thrilled to see that Ricki was part of the consultant team that we were able to hire to help us carry out this project. So you can learn more about that Black Heritage Survey by visiting cityofdubuque.org/Black Heritage Survey. And there are some small cards at the back sideboard that you can use to either scan and get to that site or find it on your own. So Ricki King is retired from John Deere Financial, and that is where she really honed her skills, sleuthing, finding information about families and properties. And she since retired from John Deere, and she's been really busy. She has a certificate in genealogy research from Boston University, as well as a BA from Drake University. She has completed many programs and certificates to further her skills as a genealogist. She's extremely active. She's the founder of Roots to Branches Genealogy. That's a firm specializing in forensic genealogy cases, identifying unknown or missing heirs, probate cases, and family research projects. She ran for president in 2020. Just leave that there. She is the vice president for the Iowa Historic Foundation. Ricki was instrumental in changing our state law to allow death records to be opened after 50 years. It's something that she found out after working as a genealogist, that she couldn't get into those and other people couldn't. So it really changed the game for people in Iowa and outside of Iowa to learn more about their families, both for genealogists and families. And Ricki has recently mentored high school and college students to help research. She mentored them to help research people associated with the Underground Railroad in Iowa that were buried at Woodlawn Cemetery in Des Moines. And one of the projects they did, which I find really interesting and just such low-hanging fruit, they created QR codes on graves so you could scan it and learn more about what the students researched and more about the person at the site. So I am honored to introduce to you our collaborator with the Black Heritage Survey. She is my friend, and she might just be our next president.
Okay. Can you see my screen or hear me?
We can hear you perfectly.
Okay. Is it okay to begin? I'm not for sure.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. It's a little. Just want to let you know to start off, my part of the migration story is only up to 1900. So I'm talking about the Great Migration, pre-Great Migration, and Jill will pick it up at 1900 and go forward. Chris has already talked about me, so thank you, Chris. I do appreciate that. And I appreciate everyone attending today. I'm defining Black pioneers, or how am I defining Black pioneers? In the beginning, I unknowingly defined it in my research projects as those Blacks who arrived in Iowa in 1850 to 1900, not realizing my focus was on pioneers. I was just focusing on Blacks. And why did I not realize that? Because I had never heard anyone refer to Iowa's Black citizens as pioneers. I've heard it in other states, but for some reason it didn't click with me that these are Iowa pioneers. A friend told me as I was researching this presentation and trying to figure out what to call it, to mention pioneers. And I was like, well, duh, that's obvious. How did I miss it? But it's here or there. I broke it up into two groups. The territory group is 1830 to 1850, and the coal miners group is 1880 to 1900. These are titles I gave, dates that I picked out. So it's not anything set in stone. It's just what I've decided to use as the stopping points in my presentation and my research. The territory days could include free persons or slaves. I want to point that out, so I'm not specifying either one. There is a third group that I will not be talking about today, but is just as important. It is those who arrived during and soon after the Civil War from 1860 to 1870, and they could have been runaway slaves, and that's just so broad, and I didn't have enough time to even include them, so I'm leaving them out of the focus for this currently. But when I consider the three groups of pioneers, each person wanted to better their life and embark on a new adventure into the unknown. And that's what's key about a pioneer. They want to venture onto something new. We'll start with the first census. It was taken in 1836. I got just a second, the screen's in my way. Iowa was part of the Wisconsin Territory. There were 3 Blacks recorded in living in Iowa and Des Moines County. Remember, it's Des Moines County that the 3 Blacks are living in. However, their numbers are not represented in their official report or statistics, or the official reported statistics, and their names are not recorded. And so we're going to start with the territory days. And these years, these years and titles are all my own. So they're not in history books or anything. So don't hold it against me. This deed is dated July 18th, 1835, when Nathaniel and Charlotte Morgan were purchased lot number 1 in Dubuque, which was part of the Michigan Territory at the time. And if some of you have heard of the bar lot number 31, lot 1 in Dubuque, this is the exact same lot that the Morgans owned. 138 years ago, they purchased it for $100. Today, that is $3,386. Remember, that's only the $100 value. That land is worth a lot more than that today. And a little over 5 years after the Morgans purchased the land, Nathaniel was taken from his home on lot number 1 and lynched on September the 6th, 1840. And here you'll see that Nathaniel and Charlotte both are listed on the land deed, and they signed it with their mark, which is unusual for a woman to be on any kind of legal document. And it was even also unusual for a Black person to be purchasing land at this time. Remember I said in 1836 census, there was 3 Blacks in Des Moines County. There was none listed in Dubuque County. But this land deed shows us that there were at least 2 Blacks in Dubuque, because it was 1835, a year before that census was taken, that they purchased this land. And up here, it shows that's the $100 cost. It's lot number 1, and they were in Michigan Territory. I do want to say that Charlotte did stick around Dubuque after Nathaniel's death, because we can find her in the records up until about 1863 when she disappeared. 1863 when she disappears from Dubuque, and we don't know if she died or if she moved away. We're still trying to find out exactly what happened to her. Hopefully we'll be able to figure that out. And this slide is about a couple of pioneering men in Dubuque. Their names are Jean Baptiste Aaron, or he was sometimes called John Baptiste Aaron, or Baptiste Aaron, or Aaron Baptiste. These are all the same men, or all the same man, I should say. It's just his name kept getting switched around. The other man is Anton Arthur, and they both owned land, which I thought was fascinating. They both owned land. And then I found out they both had wills when they died around 1855. So my mind was just blown. I'm like, wow, Black men that own land early and they left wills. I'm like, okay, this is a dream of a genealogist to find this early. No matter if the person was Caucasian or Black, wills is what people want to find because it gives the family history and tells their migration path, hopefully. But in this case, I was very happy to see that the men knew each other and they did business together. Let me zoom in on this. I'm not sure if you can see it very well, but it says the estate of Anton Arthur here. And move it over a little bit. And it goes, estate of Baptiste Aaron, this DEC is a D up here, says deceased, versus the estate of Anton Arthur, deceased. And Aaron is suing for a real estate bill for $1,048.52 on June the 9th, 1858. So I'm like, so it shows us these men knew each other and they worked together at some point. This Aaron's estate did win 7 years later in 1862. So these wills are over several years after they died. So that's very key to helping us show what this family did. In 1862, like I said, he won, and that $1,048 is equal to $30,937 today. That's a lot of money then and a lot of money today. When I started thinking of pioneers, I was only thinking of the men, and then it dawned on me, well, duh, the men that just didn't travel alone, they traveled with their women and their children. So they're also pioneers. So I'm going to focus here on both the Aaron and Arthur families, and where they both were here before statehood. And this is the 1850 census for both of them. And I'm using this census because it's the first census that lists everyone in the household. Before that, it only showed the men. And let me tell you a little bit about Jean Baptiste. And here it's showing his name is Aaron Baptiste. But he was a slave in Missouri when he married his wife, Mary. He purchased his freedom for $1,500. And then he purchased his family's freedom for another $1,000. And they moved to Dubuque. And the $2,500 is equal to $95,516 today. And I was like, okay, that's a lot of money. We know here, if you can read it, it says Aaron was a laborer. We do not know what kind of labor he did, and I wish we did, because for him to be able to raise $2,500, that's a lot of money to be able to raise when you're a slave. And if some of you guys know George Wallace Jones, he was instrumental in helping him gain his freedom. And he was a senator from Dubuque, a federal senator. And here at the very bottom column is Felix Baptiste. He was 7 years old. He was his son, and he was the first of his children born in Iowa. So that makes him born about 1843, very early before statehood. And again, he owned real estate valued at $600. And let me go over here. And I want to show you Anthony Arthur's family. And their family I should say both of them are in Dubuque at this time. I don't remember if I said that. But Anthony Arthur married his wife Agnes Langworthy in Dubuque in 1841. So we can place them in Iowa very early. The only thing we can't figure out for him is if he was already free, or if he came as a slave and bought his freedom. All we know is that he starts appearing in the records and land deeds and then on the census in the 1840s. But they had two children, Catherine and Edward. They both were born in Iowa. And by their ages, they were born in Iowa 1837 to 1838. So I think that's very fascinating how the migration in Iowa is starting early. And let me go back here I want to point out Eli Baptiste. He's going to be called later Eli Aaron. We're going to talk about him a little later in the slides. I want to point him out. He was born in Missouri and he's 11 years old in 1850. Okay, and I'm going to show you the map here is what the population of Iowa looked like in 1840 and 1850. Zoom in on this one. In 1840, Dubuque had 72 Blacks, and they had the most Blacks in the state. But this census was taken 4 months before Nathaniel Morgan's lynching on June the 1st. 10 years later, Dubuque has 28 people, 28 Blacks. We went from first for the number of Blacks to fourth. Do you think Nathaniel Morgan's lynching had something to do with that Black exodus? I'm thinking it probably did. But you know, there weren't just families that moved, there was just couples that moved to Iowa, or different types of freedom seekers. Where the Aaron and Arthur families were free when they arrived. Rachel Bundy here, she was born in came to Burlington, Iowa, and Ralph Montgomery was in Dubuque. They arrived as slaves, but both of them went to court seeking their freedom. Rachel bought her freedom, was brought to Iowa when Iowa was a territory in 1839. And if you can see that, it shows the state of Louisiana and the city of New Orleans where she was purchased. This is the actual bill of sale that was submitted in her court case. And then that's her signature for her mark, where when she testified to get her freedom, they had her sign. And that was unusual because women were not allowed to testify in court cases, but Rachel was. And she gained her freedom in Burlington, not because of the court case, but because her owner found out that he was about to lose the court case. So he gave her freedom instead of going to court and losing. The judge that was handling Rachel's case was Charles Mason. He's also the same judge that handled Ralph Montgomery's case 2 months later. We'll move to Ralph. And Ralph in the legal documents is called Ralph, a man of color. And that's what all the legal documents say. Later, he inherited the name Montgomery. And I believe, and what I've heard, is Montgomery was his owner's last name. So we don't know if he actually took that name or it kind of was given to him and then it stuck because of the owner in the case. And Ralph Montgomery came to Iowa 5 years before Rachel in 1834, when he was a slave, like I said, but he came to work in the Dubuque lead mines. And I'm sure a lot of you guys already know this, so I'll just kind of skim over it. He was trying to buy his freedom for $550. And after 5 years, he hadn't paid his owner. So his owner sent a slave catchers to rescue him back to Missouri. Well, Ralph sued for his freedom. And so he became Iowa's first Supreme Court case for this freedom, which I don't know what could be better in Iowa. There's few Blacks that we have here, and the first court case to be involved a Black person. But anyhow, this image you're looking at is actually I can't think of the word I'm trying to say. The court decision that Judge Matthew issued and the Supreme Court issued. And it reads, in quote, appearing to the satisfaction of the court on argument of counsel that the said Ralph, a man of color, is free by operation of law, end quote. Those words gave Ralph his freedom on July the 4th, 1839. And if you actually want to read the whole transcript, if you go to the State Historical Society of Iowa website and Google Ralph Montgomery, you'll find the whole transcript. It's very fascinating. It's interesting that you can actually see it. And if you go to the store building, I'm sure you can get the actual image, original. And this is where I mentioned there was a couple that came to Iowa, and they actually paid for their freedom. When they came with the intention to buy their freedom. So their owner already agreed to let them come and be free. We don't know if he brought them or she brought them. And what we know about them is on their headstones, which is very faint here. But in 1887, there was a newspaper column that their doctor, or the doctor reverend from their church, actually gave a transcription of their headstones. So we're so lucky to be able to have that for our history. And I'll read a little bit of what Kitty, Uncle Ben's wife, put on his headstone. It goes, in memory of Benjamin Sandridge, commonly known as Uncle Ben, born a slave in Virginia and held in bonds about 49 years. died a free man by the laws of his country and by the grace of his God in Iowa, November the 7th, 1855, being about 53 years of age. And part of Miss Kitty's headstone, or Aunt Kitty's headstone, reads, in memory of Catherine Sandridge, commonly known as Aunt Kitty, born a slave, the wife of Uncle Ben, and with him made free by their payment of $1,000 to their master. Both became members of the First Baptist Church, Burlington, Iowa, at its organization 1849. Died September the 10th, 1863, being about 60 years of age. And just think, if that was not transcribed, we would not know anything about these two pioneer seekers. Their story would have been lost to time. But instead we have it because it's on their headstone. As far as we know, they did not have any kids. Miss Kitty's headstone was purchased years after her death, when Dr. Johnson came to town and found out that she did not have one. And then I want to show you, everyone always says Iowa was a free state. We never had slaves. Well, I want to prove them wrong here. In 1860, there's two numbers. The 81 means that's how many Blacks were in the county of Dubuque. The 29 is how many of them were free. That's a difference of 52 people, which means there was 52 Blacks or 52 slaves in Dubuque in 1860. They were not reported as slaves because we were a free state. There was no slave schedule. And I wish they would have gone on and done that, because we're missing all the information on who those slaves were or who actually owned them. And then we could have been able to look for more information. If you're wondering, the total Blacks in Iowa at this time is 1,134. The total free were 1,023. So that leaves about 111 that were slaves across the state. We were not a slave-holding state. There were slaves here. So get it out of your mind that we never had slaves. I want to end that myth right now. And another way I should say that we had slaves, that slaves were here, they might have been, say, before they got to Iowa, their owner would make them sign a lifetime contract as a servant. And so they were considered servants, but they actually were slaves because they could never get out of that contract. So there could have been even more slaves here, just under a different name. And let's look at Dubuque's Black pioneers. Remember, we were looking at two pioneering groups from 1830 to 1850 and 1880 to 1900. And we'll start with Henry Christopher. And I'm sure some of you guys know him. He was not unique in that he lived off and on in Dubuque and in Galena. He also lived in East Dubuque, and he bounced between the cities. He had 8 children, and he actually, when he came to Iowa, I messed up. He had 8 children, some born in Iowa and some in Illinois. And Mr. Christopher was a pioneer in 2 states. Because from our time frame, when he arrived in Illinois in 1840, that makes him a pioneer there. And that's when his daughter Margaret was born. And then he goes off to the Civil War as I can't say a musician, he was a bugle player. Then he returns to Galena. And then a few years later, he moves to Iowa in 1874. So he's in that Civil War time frame that we're not actually discussing today, but it still makes him a pioneer in Iowa. And he came to Iowa in 1874 when his daughter was born. So that's how we can pinpoint when he was in each state. And many other Dubuque residents went back and forth between Dubuque, Galena, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and even Chicago. And I like to think it's come full circle with Dubuque residents going to Chicago in the late 1800s, early 1900s, to now they're moving back to Dubuque. Could these be the descendants of those early Dubuquers that went to Chicago? I like to think it probably is, but I don't know. And remember earlier, I said, remember Eli Aaron or Eli Baptiste from the 1850 census? He was part of the pioneering family. Well, I like to zoom in because I'm not sure how close you guys can see it. At some point, the Aaron men lived in St. Paul, Minnesota, because this is a 1906 newspaper article seeking the whereabouts of Phil and Eli Aaron. And I haven't been able to tie them together as relatives, but they could be brothers or they could be cousins or an uncle. Phil disappears. His wife, Mary Ann, is buried in Dubuque. So I like to say they're brothers. But let me read you this article in case you can't read it. It says, friends in Dubuque of the following persons who formerly lived in Dubuque would be very glad to learn of their whereabouts, as it means much to them. Misters Phil and Eli Aaron, John, it's either, because it's distorted, it's either Duffin, D-U-F-F-I-N, or Dutton, D-U-T-T-I-N-O-N. I'm not sure what John's last name is, and Isaac Smith. Anyone knowing of the residence of said persons will please notify the agent of Minneapolis or through the columns of the Dubuque items. And the agent of Minneapolis would be the person who was supplying information on the Minneapolis column in the bystander, or in the Dubuque items is the column that only talked about the happenings that were going on in Dubuque. And just to let you know, Eli and Aaron, they were considered boatmen. Sometimes they were firemen, and we don't know what happened to them. They disappeared, like people are saying here, they disappeared. They have disappeared from the records as well. And this is Guy Green. He was born in Dubuque in 1895, so he makes it as a pioneer by 5 years. But he's a good pioneer. He went to Dubuque schools in 1910. He lived in Minneapolis. And although he may have left Dubuque, as many did, he frequently moved around the city, as well as other citizens who just might have moved 3 doors down or next door, the next door over. They stayed in their little pocket of Dubuque that the Blacks were able to live in. And we can only guess why Black citizens left Dubuque. Was it because of their work on the railroad or the riverboats, or were they seeking a bigger Black community? We don't know, but we know Guy Brown left. One of the reasons he left was he was a Black officer in the training camp at Fort Des Moines. We don't know if he was in the first group, and if he was, he could have been in this picture. Once the war was over, some men returned to Des Moines, some returned to Dubuque or other towns in Iowa. Guy remained in Des Moines until his death in 1974. But I'm sure he visited family in Dubuque. Now we'll move on to the coal mining pioneers. And this might have helped why Dubuque dropped in population down to 9. It's because the coal mines started recruiting Blacks. Oops, I skipped the slide here. Oh, I jumped ahead. Sorry, I jumped ahead there. I'll come back to that recruitment. In 1885, Dubuque had, I jumped ahead a little bit. Sorry, I jumped way ahead. In 1870, Dubuque had the most Blacks at 167, and they went down to 9. That was 15 years later. And as I was saying a second ago, when I was on the wrong slide, I'm sorry, is the population might have dropped down to 9 because of the recruitment of Blacks in the coal mines, because they recruited them in the South, in Virginia area. And I'm sure they also did it around Iowa as well. And the Blacks were recruited to come to Iowa as strike breakers. So when the whites went on strike, they would hire Blacks at a lower cost to kill the strike. And some of the recruiting coal mines, or the well-known coal mines in Iowa areas, is Munchauconic and in Buxton, which was a Black coal mining town. And they were both in Mahaska County. And there's a white breast coal mine in Lucas County. And this ad here is the ad for White Breast Coal Mine. And they're telling people that they're bringing 150 to 200 males to 300 females to Iowa. My family came from Albemarle County, Virginia, and our artist Jill Wells's family came from Bedford County, Virginia. They may have seen these ads or ones like it, and that's why they came to Iowa. On the 1885 census, Iowa census, my 2 times great-grandfather, Pleasant Jones here, he was listed as working as a coal miner in White Breast, the same coal mine that was bringing the 150 to 200 males to Iowa. He came with his wife and 2 daughters. The daughters aren't pictured because they have already died by the time this picture is taken. But Pleasant moves his family to Centerville, Iowa, where he worked as a pastor. He no longer will be recorded as a coal miner. All right, that's hard to say. Our artist Jill Wells's family was also part of Iowa's Black migration and pioneers. I hope you can get a kick out of what I found as much as Jill and I did. A minute ago, I mentioned that my 2 times great-grandfather was a coal miner and became a pastor in Centerville. As Jill and I were talking, Jill mentioned her family came from Centerville. I'm like, oh, that's so weird. So now I was telling her about my 2 times great-grandfather. As we did more research, we found this marriage certificate you're looking at, where Jill's 2 times great-grandparents, Charles Simmons and Pearl Williams, or Pearl Washington, are getting married. And what do you know? They're getting married in Centerville. What are the odds? Charles is also a coal miner. You know, I don't know. It's still blowing my mind on how this has happened. As we're looking at this, and I had just mentioned how my 2 times great-grandfather was a pastor, and I'm pointing out to Jill, you know, this is your grandfather, your grandmother, where they were from, their parents' names, and we get all the way over here, and I'm like, you won't believe it. Reverend P.W. Jones. That's my 2 times great-grandfather, AKA Pleasant Jones. So did they meet in Lucas County when they were working in the coal mines? Did they meet in Centerville when they were attending church? Or did they just find a pastor that they needed to marry him? We'll never know. But we do know that 123 years later, Jill Wells's art exhibit has again tied our families together. And I'm sure we will remain friends because Jill is a very great person and very personable. Thank you for attending. Jill and I will take questions after she finishes her talk, which is coming up next.
Hello, everyone. I'm gonna get situated here. Try to prevent my laptop from falling. Take a quick drink of water. How's everyone feeling? Good. Good. I'm feeling very excited, very honored, very humbled to be here today. It's an absolute pleasure to be in conversation with you all, sharing time and space with each of you, whether virtually or in person, here and now or later via YouTube sharing. Again, my name is Jill Wells. I'm an artist, multimedia. I'm a mentor and an advocate. I'm a 42-year-old BIPOC female or Black Indigenous person of color. I have short black hair. I'm wearing a black and blue striped blouse, black slacks, and a gold necklace. For this talk, I'll be going through and speaking with you today about art and history that's connected to Black thread. My first large-scale immersive art exhibition installed at the Dubuque Museum of Art. Don't be afraid, said the butterfly. Change is such a beautiful thing. The narrative begins as approximately 4,000 plus Black butterflies glide from floor to ceiling across every wall, cascading from above and wheeling in reverence. Black thread presents the journey and geography of one of the largest movements of people in United States history and reconsiders this historic phenomenon known as the Great Migration, a time between 1910 and 1970 when over 6 million African Americans from the South migrated to the industrial cities of the Northeast, Midwest, and the West. Quote, they did what human beings looking for freedom throughout history have often done. They left. End quote. Isabel Wilkerson, The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration. So this slide shows the image of the document that Ricki King was talking about, a beautifully weathered document. The beginning of my looking began in a warm, private study room at the Urbandale Public Library in 2022 with forensic genealogist and historian Ricki King. My father is James Vincent Simmons, who was born in 1960, and he passed in 1982 in Des Moines, Iowa. My mother is Tori Elizabeth Smith Simmons. She was born in 1959. She grew up in Indianola, Iowa, as did I and my siblings, and she lives in Des Moines, Iowa to this day. My father's African American and my mother is German Cherokee. There were many reasons why gaining access to my paternal genealogy was complicated. Additionally, a different set of complications arose when gaining knowledge of my maternal genealogy. When it comes to my maternal genealogy, one of the most challenging documents was a will and testament given to me by my maternal grandfather back in 2004, 1 year before I graduated from Drake University. In part, it read, quote, "At the death of my wife, I give my Negro man Tom to my son. To him, his heirs, and assigns forever. For the use and benefit of my Negro man Tom, I give and bequeath unto my wife a certain small mare, which my Negro man Tom purchased with his own money. This will belong to my maternal grandfather's mother's side of his family from Cooper County, Missouri. When it comes to my paternal genealogy, one of the most joyful reads was that of a marriage census document, the one that we have in this slide currently, given to me by Ricki King. In part, it read, quote, "Return of marriages in Appanoose County, Iowa, year ending in 1900. This was the marriage record of my paternal great-great-grandparents dated June 25th, 1899. The marriage took place at Second Baptist Church in Centerville, Iowa. The presiding minister, as Ricki mentioned, of this ceremony was Reverend P.W. Jones, Ricki King's great-great-grandfather. It is indeed a small world. Additionally, this is the same church Simon Estes attended. With Black Thread, I was able to research my ancestral ties to the Great Migration with Ricki King without DNA testing in order to contextualize migration narratives and personal histories through the lens of my contemporary practice. As a creative, I feel a great responsibility to use my art to provide a thoughtful critique of the different systems at work in our society. Quote, "Beware of he who would deny you access to information, for in his heart he dreams himself your master." End quote, Sid Meir. Access to information is liberation, it is power, it is knowledge of self and others, and it is education. And education is the premise of progress. Think of a time in your life when you did not have access to a person, place, or thing that you needed. Accessibility is the quality of being able to obtain or use, be reached or entered, easily understood or appreciated. In this slide, we see a Braille book that is part of the Black Thread exhibition. Using various mediums, this large-scale installation is designed to be accessible visually, tactily, and audibly. Museum visitors are allowed to gently touch art level pieces that are at ground level, including custom Braille works. Additionally, QR codes with immersive audio descriptions are available throughout the exhibition and online. And a virtual tour of this exhibition will be available online soon as well. Art for me has always been about communication. How can stainless steel, plastic, wood, acrylic, fabric, and thread communicate the driving forces behind the Great Migration? When those driving forces were to escape racial violence, pursue economic and educational opportunities, and obtain freedom from the oppression of the caste Jim Crow system of the American South. How can a sewing machine, deconstructed flags, and thousands of Black butterflies tell these stories? the sewing machine. In this slide, we see a combination of images from left to right of a 1958 Kenmore convertible sewing machine with a table. A machine with a mechanically driven needle that is used for joining together pieces of cloth. With a needle that is operated either by turning a handle or by electricity. An apparatus using or applying mechanical power, having several parts, each with a different function, and together performing a particular task. The sewing machine takes its rightful place in the center of the installation, acknowledging the sewing of the fabric of America done by countless African Americans throughout US history. Originally a golden brown oak stain, the machine has been transformed. The metamorphic process of white primer and cobalt blue acrylic underpainting has led the way for eclosion as the sewing machine emerges in its black on black beauty. The flag. In this slide, we see two images from left to right, one black and white, one in color, of a flag that I will go ahead and describe now. Draped on top of the left side of the sewing table and pinned beneath the presser foot rests the flag. Created by deconstructing and then reconstructing both the 1990 David Hammond's African American flag and the 1861 through 65 black and white American flag. This banner of fortitude and abundance remains in process. As black butterflies move over color fields, pushing their way through statehood and weaving between the stripes, they thread together an unwillingness to surrender, constructing a new landscape and connecting moments across time and space. Quote, "We must never forget that Black history is American history. The achievements of African Americans have contributed to our nation's greatness." End quote. Yvette Clark. The movement. In this slide, we have an image of the map of the Great Migration from 1910 through 1970. Human patterns of movement reflect the conditions of a changing world. The Great Migration is often broken into two phases, coinciding with the participation and the effects of the United States in both world wars. In 1910, 89% of African Americans lived in the South. By 1970, only 53% of African Americans lived in the South. In the beginning, labor agents played a large role in spurring the mass migration of Southern migrants to the industrial North, promising better jobs and education and opportunities. Some agents would even stand on street corners holding out train tickets to young males as an incentive to move north. Using the Great Migration map by Michael Siegel and coordinates sourced from the Atlas of African American History and Politics, I began to dream about this movement. Black thread began like the flap of a butterfly's wings and evolved into kaleidoscopes of black butterflies moving over white spaces. A movement in every direction, as the interior space of the museum lobby becomes the landscape of these patterns of migration. A movement of families in the fight for Black joy, racial justice, escaping exploitation, lynching, and sexual violence, traveling by train, boat, bus, automobile, or even by horse-drawn carts. Families seeking political asylum within the borders of their own country are not unlike refugees in other parts of the world fleeing famine, war, or pestilence. Black thread brings together the complex impact of the Great Migration and the lives of the very people in this room those online, and countless others. In this slide, we see and have a set of images from left to right showing the installation of the exhibition Black Thread. All the images are in black and white. My hope is one gets the sense that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. And this means that each of our lives is so very, very important. We can continue works begun by those who have transcended to finish the job and begin anew. Additionally, my hope is that visitors of Black Thread are encouraged to share their own personal and familial stories of migration today and moving into the future. As I close out, I would like to leave you with two things: a call to action and words of gratitude. So first, a call to action. This is a call for visibility of African American history in education and accessibility to this education. Examples of this would be creating more Black educational spaces, workspaces, art spaces, play, health, and entertainment spaces. Sharing the importance of the Dubuque Black History Survey, sharing about forensic genealogist and historian Ricki King and her services on social media or in person, and making time and space for difficult questions and conversations surrounding African American or Black history. And when those conversations arise, please actively listen, because nothing that I have shared today would have come to pass without other people. Nothing I do is by myself or on my own. In my practice over the next year, I will be conducting rigorous, socially engaged research and play to create and develop progressive, inclusive, accessible new forms of work focused on problem solving and placemaking. There are many things I was unable to share in this abbreviated presentation, so I look forward to the Q&A. Additionally, please reach out to me at any time or let me know how I can reach out to you in order to remain in conversation. And last, I would like to mirror some sentiment and express some gratitude. Anderson Sancy, the staff and volunteers of Dubuque Museum of Art, Green State Credit Union, and John Deere Dubuque, Ricki King, Karen Cunningham, and Jerry Cole of Iowa Department for the Blind, Mary Frances Evans, the Executive Director of Iowa Radio Reading Information Services, Madeline Betcher, Vincent Simmons, Andrew Clement, Tobias Tyler, and Carter Lawson of Good Vibes Media, and Dale Campbell Jr., Positive Productions Plus. Excuse me. Thank you very much for your time today. God bless. Okay. Love questions. Can Ricki hear it?
Yes, I can hear. Should I turn my video on okay?
Sure.
Hi. Hi, Ricki.
Hi.
I have an old map of Dubuque that it's one of those maps that it looks like it was taken from a balloon. And you see all the buildings and they're all noted. And it's from 1877, I believe. So it's obviously not a photograph, it's hand drawn. But on 17th Street, there's a church and it's the Black Methodist Church. And I've not been able to find, other than that reference and that picture of it, I've not been able to find anything about that church, what happened to it, where it went, where its records are. I wonder if either of you have had the opportunity to see that or find it.
I would imagine Ricki.
Actually, Chris in the room that introduced me.
Yeah, I would love to see that if you still have it. Do you? That's good. And
The joke is, our house just was destroyed in a fire,
yeah.
but that piece survived.
Yeah. No, that's an inside joke, not very funny. So, but I'd love to see that because we know that in 1924, the AME Church tried to work with the St. John's Episcopal, and they proposed, the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, proposed that they become Episcopalians under that parish, that the Episcopalian parish purchased that building. It was the old Zion Church, and that it become the place of the Black Episcopalian church. So it will be segregated churches, but under the same umbrella of Episcopalians. In 1924, the St. John's Episcopal denied that. They said it would be kind of a weird way to gain new members, or it wouldn't be the proper way to gain new members. And so they decided not to do it. So I'm not familiar with them practicing there. I know that their church that they built on Robinson Avenue, which is really like the parking lot north of the Telegraph Herald, under the bluff, or it's a little bit west of there. So their church was there, that they built in 1880. And it was really deteriorated. It wasn't big enough for them in the 20s. They started meeting in a house on University at one point in the 1930s. So we've tracked them around, and we know there's a relationship to that Zion Church, but I'm not familiar with it being the church. So I'd love to see what you have.
I'm going to interject and ask you to share another little piece of history that was surfaced through research and is an interesting connection about the origin story of that.
So so Charlotte Morgan, who we heard about before, she was one of, I believe, a dozen financial donors to the first church in what would become Iowa. So that would be the Methodist Episcopal Church that was built on the site of Washington Park. And in 1839, the Methodist Episcopal Church built the Centenary Church. So that's 100 years after John Wesley's epiphany, I think. I'm not a Methodist Episcopal historian, but so there's a Centenary Church on the site of the Dubuque Museum of Art. The Methodist Church, and so we believe that the Black Church was still using that old church at the Washington Park, and that at the Dubuque Museum of Art site, the Centenary Church was built in 1839. That church moved on, and they moved further north, and that would become St. Luke's Methodist Episcopal Church, and later Methodist Church. So the Black Church moved into the Centenary Church. I'm forgetting what year it is right now, but by the 1860s, the Dubuque Community Schools, what we know as the Board of Education, started a Black segregated school in the basement of that church. So the Black Methodist Church ME Church was meeting upstairs. The school was downstairs. We presented about the Black Heritage Survey. I didn't really put it together. We were standing in the classroom stairs, and I was like, oh, this is the site where the school was. But so that was downstairs. And they used that site till about 1880. The Black Methodist Episcopal Church then built their own church over on Robinson Avenue. So, and Robinson Avenue was removed. The street was removed. The buildings were removed pretty much by 1956 as part of urban renewal. That's one of the hardest stories we have to tell, is housing and urban renewal, and how that was all mixed up in financial practices and social norms, and being able to track how difficult it was to be Black and find places to live here in Dubuque. And that is a story nationally that you know, we see nationally, we see it reflected here in Dubuque. But we've got that. So I don't even know where I was going with that, but we've got the Black Methodist Episcopal Church there that was removed by the 1950s. At least the building was before or by then, but we know that they were practicing elsewhere and looking elsewhere to be able to find a church. So.
Yeah, do you have a question?
Do you know what the boundaries were for Blacks to live in Dubuque? And when those were? So Ricki, did you hear that? I'll repeat it. What were the boundaries of the neighborhoods in which Black people lived in Dubuque? And Ricki's work really found that those earliest families were living down at like literally lot 1, first lot in the village of Dubuque, first in Maine. I mean, it's the center of things, right? Down by the river, which is closer to the river at that time. So that's our earliest record of ownership. And then your research, I'm pointing to your picture here, Ricki.
Okay.
Your research shows different purchases of land where Sunshine Restaurant is, where the Bishop Block is, right south of Julian Hotel. So being able to, those are different areas that we know Black families lived and owned in Dubuque. So that's the earliest, and we see them moving up that 8th Street and the hill, active in downtown. We see social, fraternal organizations on Main Street and right around that area around the Dubuque Museum of Art and going up 8th Street. If you go up 8th Street, you've got University on one side, you've got Hill on another, and all the way up to, if you know where Wilson Avenue is, or Wilson Street, and then there's one street behind it, Roberts. And up at Roberts Street, we have west on Roberts, we have a Green Book tourist home. So Victor Green created the Negro Motorist travel guides, the Green Book. So there's a tourist home up on Roberts Avenue or Roberts Street in the 1950s. We have another Green Book tourist home over on 712 University. Both of those buildings are still there today. So that's over on the university side. We had lots of activity, and the grocery store that people in the neighborhood visited, Kissel's Grocery, and up 8th Street, really on the north side of 8th Street, there's a row of houses there where everybody that's anybody lived, it seems like. And on the west or on the south side, we've got Hill Street going up, and Dr. Henry Martin and his family with Captain Robert Martin lived at 560 Hill Street, still there. It's well maintained. Yay. And so we've got that boundary of the 8th Street neighborhood, but it spills out into the downtown, and the downtown part is earlier. Ricki?
Yes, I agree with you. And thanks for that information, to sharing it for us.
I guess two questions. So the first one, can you talk about the connection with making arts accessible? Is there a personal connection for you? And then the second question would be, for all of us who are in this space who may want to stay connected with your artwork, is there a way to do that?
I have a website, so it's www.jillwellsart.com. You can get my phone number on there. You can text me, you can call me, you can email me, you can visit the site, drop messages, and then exchange, if you're comfortable, your contact information as well. And as far as some of my lived experiences, I would say probably the most impactful one in making the decision to be very aware of something that I was very blissfully unaware of is, as a visual artist, there's a large segment of our population that is at a different level of being able to access that due to visual impairment. So my brother had a brain aneurysm when he was 18. It was the cause for the loss of his eyesight. And he's had a pretty amazing recovery despite a prognosis that was not very positive. And so he was like that kid growing up in my life that just constantly inspired me, and we would do art together, and we were very close, myself, my brother, and my sister. And so I struggled for a long time in trying to find a way to sit down and create with him, and create work that he could access. And since I didn't study sound art, I'm not much of a techie either. I was trying to find tactile mediums to do that with him. So it's taken a long time. Through some mural jobs that I have had, I was connected with individuals in the disability community that are experts in their field that I've been able to collaborate with in building out larger bodies of work that are a little bit more accessible, but I still have a longer vision of where I want these works to be. And so if there are individuals in the room who you're ever interested in having those conversations with me, I would welcome that tremendously. It's a great question.
So I have two questions. One is, what is the David Hammond's American flag? And then the second is, did you fabricate all those butterflies yourself?
I have done a series in the past. So during the pandemic, I started a work on Braille. It is a version of the ADA, so the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. I purchased that online. Anyone can purchase a copy of it. I think it's like somewhere in the neighborhood of like $22. It's rather thick because Braille is a larger print. And, you know, I was home like many of us, just kind of trying to figure out how to occupy my mind and my body, and my moods would kind of dictate the color fields that I would paint across those pages. And because you have oftentimes double-sided text with Braille, you have a convex and then a concave. So as you're painting over the surface, unless you're pushing really, really hard, you're not going to get the paint, in my case, because I use oils primarily, into those dips. So it feels very celestial if you're able to see it, because it looks like little star points. And so I started thinking about like how light enters the retina and these other conversations that are paired with the visual outcome, but then the tactile outcome. And then as I got through that whole book, I started deconstructing it into butterflies as a metaphor for the transformative impact of the piece of legislation that it was itself. Like it transformed the lives of countless people. So I was trying to find a way to have that conversation. So I have done a series where I actually did all the like thousands of butterflies myself, but for this one, I was kind of a quick turn time. So I went with a distributor that I've worked with before and done a black piano with these black butterflies. And then the David Hammond's is a flag that is inspired from the Pan-African flag created by Marcus Garvey. It has a green color field for the stars, and then the stars are black. And then the stripes are black and white, or I'm sorry, not black and white, red and black. And so I started deconstructing that whole flag and then purchased a black and white American flag and deconstructing that too, and started to kind of weave these two together and play around with them.
We do have a question online. And if I can, I'll read the question. It goes, I am in California and a researcher of Bay Area migration. My question is history of Black Iowans taught in public schools, and do young Black Iowans leave Iowa for school and careers? No, we have no Black history here in Iowa. That's taught, at least when I was going to school, they might have increased it since I was going to school in 1985. So I'm answering I'm 55, so I'm answering from a while ago. And what I learned about Black history was my grandmother taught it in Muscatine, Iowa at the community college. So I always knew about Black history, but I didn't realize everyone else didn't know about it. And then I became a genealogist researcher. And the one thing I didn't want to do is Black history, because there's not a lot of Blacks in Iowa that I was going to make money off of. And since the pandemic, I've actually been pushed into being a Black history researcher, which now I'm loving because I actually know more about my state than I ever thought I would know on Black history. And I'm so wanting to share it with people. And hopefully I'll be able to write a book or some more articles on it, who knows? And in reference to Black Iowans leave Iowa for schools and careers, it's the same as with Caucasians. The young leave, they come back. I don't think it's any different that way. And is there any teachers in the room that know if we are teaching in school?
You said we're not?
No, we are. So I think just
My
this
son,
year,
you guys are gonna put him on black.
just this year, my school started teaching, I think, the first college level Black history class in Iowa.
So that's the first one, Vincent, the
Yeah.
first one this year, not at first. So 2023, 2022.
2022. I was like, at the
Twenty
start.
twenty-two comes online for at least Des Moines Public Schools, the very first ever.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your work. And let's continue this conversation over a drink and some barbecue with some music. Take a look at some art back in the museum. Thank you all so much.